2010 to mid-2013, or in the intervening 10 or so years. As highlighted in paragraph 7 of the Terms of Reference, the inquiry holds closed hearings and takes all necessary steps to protect sensitive material and the security of witnesses. I'm going to ask Mr. Glasgow to give an update on some of the closed hearings that have taken place and that will take place in due course, as well as outline some of the work and rulings that have been made in preparation for closed hearings and the nature of the open hearings that are going to take place in the next couple of days. Before I do so, I want to reiterate the call for evidence. If ever there was a time for individuals to come forward with information for the inquiry, it is now. If anyone has any information or material which may be relevant to the inquiry and has not already got in touch, I urge you to get in contact with the inquiry immediately and directly. The inquiry has set up secure and confidential methods of getting in touch directly with the inquiry team, which you will find on the inquiry website. And the fact that you have made contact will be treated with the utmost confidentiality. Mr. Glasgow.
Sir, as you've just observed, we last met in open in early December for the hearings that dealt with the UK SF Surfer, which is known as ITS-1. This week we have two open hearings. The Right Honourable Johnny Mercer MP will be giving evidence today, and Mark Nichol, a journalist, giving evidence tomorrow. With your leave and prior to calling Mr. Mercer, I propose to provide a brief update of some of the work that has been undertaken by the inquiry since the December hearings, and to set in context the evidence that we are to hear over the course of the next 2 days. I can confirm that in November of last year, the inquiry held closed hearings at which evidence. Air Commodore Matt Brasani and a senior member of the Armed Forces with expertise in Special Forces both gave evidence. Given the topics and sensitivity, you decided that their evidence was to be given in closed, but that consideration should be given to whether a gist could be provided at the conclusion of the hearings. A copy of your final decision in that regard will be published on the inquiry's website later today. A short summary of the topics that their evidence was to cover was provided to each of the core participants in advance of those closed hearings, and that included those representing the Afghan families. And that short summary will also be published as part of the gist of their evidence in due course, in order that the public can better follow the process that has been undertaken before closed hearings have been held. The core participants were then given the opportunity to suggest questions for the individual witnesses, and those questions were carefully considered by the inquiry legal team and pursued where appropriate. Since those hearings, sir, work has been undertaken to prepare an open gist of those hearings which will be published, as well as opening up for publication 2 exhibits referred to in that evidence. I'm pleased to report that that gist has now been finalised, and a copy was provided to each of the core participants yesterday with a confidentiality undertaking, and it will be published on the website later today. The 2 exhibits that I've just referred to will follow in due course when final versions are received from the Ministry of Defence. Can I turn to deal with some of the work that has been done to date? Significant work has been undertaken by the inquiry team in relation to a number of strands of evidence and in preparation for the hearings to follow this year. That work includes preparations for hearings relating to concerns and complaints, which addresses, as its title suggests, those concerns and complaints that were expressed about the very conduct with which this inquiry is concerned. The first set of these hearings includes evidence from 7 UKSF witnesses, which, for reasons I will explain in a moment, you have determined will be heard in closed. Today and tomorrow, as I've just said, we will hear evidence from the Minister for Veterans Affairs, the Right Honourable Johnny Mercer MP, and from the Defence and Diplomacy Editor of the Daily Mail, the journalist Mark Nichol. Both of them have provided statements to this inquiry. I hope that it will be helpful for those present and following the inquiry remotely if I set out some of the steps taken in preparation for today and tomorrow's hearings and in advance of the closed hearings. In accordance with the restriction order protocol, the inquiry's proposed approach was set out in the first instance to the MOD as the provider of the material and to Mr. Mercer's legal team in respect of his evidence. The MOD made an application for a hearing restriction order in respect of the 7 UKSF witnesses, along with anonymity applications for each of them, and for appropriate redactions to the hearing bundle and their statements. In respect of Mr. Mercer, the MOD applied for limited redactions to his witness statement and redactions to the documentation. They made no application for a restriction order in respect of his evidence, but they've made clear that they neither confirm nor deny the contents of his evidence. They agreed that his evidence should be given in open, and Mr. Mercer did not make any applications for a restriction order himself. In accordance with the protocol, you reached a provisional decision which was provided to all core participants, including those representing the Afghan families. The proposed approach, in light of the material held by the inquiry, was that the 7 UKSF witnesses should give evidence in closed, but that Mr. Mercer's evidence could and should be given in open. The core participants were provided with a redacted bundle of documents for both the concerns and complaints hearing and a separate bundle in respect of Mr. Mercer. The provision of those documents to all parties, whether it be core participants or witnesses, is subject to a confidentiality undertaking, and to be clear, such documents should and must not be given to the press or otherwise put into the public domain unless and until such time as they are published on the inquiry's website. Those representing the Afghan families did not object to the granting of anonymity for the 7 UKSF witnesses, nor did they seek open hearings for their evidence. They recognised that the hearings could not take place in public, but they requested that they be permitted to be present at those hearings, albeit subject to a time delay. You carefully considered those submissions and reached your final decision regarding those hearings on the 30th of January. In summary, you decided the UKSF witnesses would be granted anonymity, the evidence of the UKSF witnesses would be given in closed, the evidence of Mr. Mercer would be given in open, the MOD would be permitted to redact the statements and documents with the details to be agreed with the inquiry's legal team. Redacted bundles would be published on the inquiry's website at the conclusion of the hearings to enable the public to see such evidence as has been possible to be put into open. A gist of the closed hearings would be provided at their conclusion. The full reasons for your decision are set out in the final decision, which with other documents will be published on the inquiry's website today. However, to summarise, in reaching your decision about the complaints hearings being heard in closed, you considered that such an approach leads to a significantly greater prospect of receiving the witnesses' best evidence and the inquiry being able to get to the truth of the issues and ultimately allaying public concern about the matters which are the subjects of the terms of reference. You also set out why the proposed approach by the Afghan family representatives would add a level of complexity and difficulty which is neither sensible, proportionate, or justified. The approach has the following advantages, which I believe the public would understand. In particular, first, it enables the counsel to the inquiry team to ask searching questions without the need to fetter their questioning in order to take account of national security sensitivities. Second, it enables the CTI team to challenge the evidence given and to do so with the full context and background that includes sensitive topics. Third, it removes entirely the prospect of a witness who does not intend to assist the inquiry being able to use the sensitivity of material to avoid or to prevent challenge. Fourth, it prevents a chilling effect on witnesses who are seeking to assist the inquiry and who would be concerned about the presence of various representatives and the sensitivities around what material can be provided. The inquiry has sought to minimise the redactions wherever possible, but your decision recognises that inadvertent disclosure remains a risk, and indeed there were a number of disruptions to the ITS-1 hearings in December. As you set out in your decision, the details redacted from the complaints hearing bundles address some very sensitive material which, if inadvertently revealed, could have a significant effect on national security. The 7 UKSF witnesses will therefore give evidence at closed hearings, the location, dates and times of which are not to be published, and about which a restriction order has been made. A copy of that restriction order will also be published on the inquiry's website very shortly. Consideration will be given to providing a gist of those hearings, and it is anticipated that a redacted copy of the bundle will be published on the inquiry's website once all 7 UKSF witnesses have given evidence. As explained earlier, a redacted bundle has been disclosed to the core participants subject to a confidentiality undertaking and to facilitate all the core participants in suggesting appropriate Rule 10 questions. The provision of documents by the inquiry to core participants in advance of the hearings is intended to facilitate their engagement and involvement in the process. However, the provision of that information is, I re-emphasise, subject to a clear confidentiality undertaking and must not be disclosed to anyone without the express permission of the inquiry. I can confirm that one of the 7 UKSF witnesses, who's known by the cipher N2107, has given evidence already. N2107 is an officer who joined UKSF3 after completion of his training. I dealt with some of his evidence in my opening statement and went through the various emails that he had sent between January and April 2011, which contained contemporaneous concerns expressed about the activities of UKSF. At the time of sending those emails, he was an officer commanding a role in a location based abroad but not in Afghanistan, and was at that time under the command of the commanding officer of UKSF3, albeit with no formal command relationship with SFHQA. You substantially limited the attendance at that hearing, including restricting the numbers and individuals who were permitted to be present. A fuller gist will be prepared in due course, but sir, as you know, in summary, the witness's evidence included evidence to the following effect. He believed that members of UKSF1 might have committed murder whilst conducting DDOs in Afghanistan during the relevant period. He also believed that members of UKSF1 might have deliberately falsified the post-operational reports to cover up what they had done. He also confirmed that he still had those beliefs as at the date he gave his evidence. Returning then to the open hearings to take place this week, both the evidence of Mr. Mercer and Mr. Nicol will be broadcast subject to a 10 minutes time delay to enable any applications for a restriction order, if necessary, to be made. The witness statement of Mr. Mercer and the redacted bundle of documents, insofar as any exhibits are referred to in these hearings, will be published on the inquiry's website later today. The witness statement of Mr. Nicol and his exhibit will be published on the inquiry's website at the conclusion of his evidence, which I anticipate will be at some point tomorrow. So with those introductory remarks having now been concluded, can I invite Mr. Mercer to take his place in the witness box? I see him sat at the side of court,
Thank you.
Repeat after me.
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence which I shall give
shall be the truth,
the
the
the whole truth,
and nothing
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Please, sir. Could you give the court your full name, please?
Yep, my name is Johnny Mercer.
And Mr. Mercer, have you provided a statement to the inquiry dated the 24th of November of last year?
I have.
Is that statement available to you in the file that you've got, which you've just picked up?
Yes, it is.
Have you had an opportunity to look at that statement before coming into court this morning to give evidence to the inquiry?
Yes, I did.
And have you also got behind that a number of exhibits that were provided either by you or given to you to assist you in the giving of your evidence?
I do.
And would you like that witness statement to stand as your evidence to the inquiry?
Yes.
Now then, sir, can I check what other material you've got available to you? And can I suggest, if you won't mind, that the jug of water might be sensibly moved out of the way? Experience has shown that inevitably the water will end up going where it shouldn't. And you've got a number of files to work with at the moment. You have the black file, which has your witness statement and exhibits.
Yep.
You have a red file, which you opened a moment ago, which contains a number of ciphers, and it may be that we'll need to look at that at some point, but can I just make this very clear to you? When we come to deal with elements of UK Special Forces, with individuals who have worked or work for UK Special Forces, I don't want you to identify units or names, please. If we need to, I will invite you to write that information down with a pen and paper available to you, and we'll progress that way, okay? If there is a moment when you're not sure about a unit, a name, part of the armed forces, can I invite you to turn to that red file to check for yourself? And if there's any concern, we will have a pause. I will allow you to check where you are, and if necessary, I will help you or others will help you. Okay?
Sure.
And there's also a copy of your book in the witness box with you. I don't think we're going to need to turn to it, but if we need to, I'll invite you to look to it. I'm sure you're very familiar with it.
Last known copy, sir.
Well, we paid full price, you'll be pleased
Good.
to know. Can I identify the areas that I'd like to touch on in your evidence? And before I do so, can I give you what I hope is some reassurance? First, if you don't follow anything I ask or anything I ask you to look at, that is my fault and not yours. Please ask me to rephrase any question, to repeat any question. If you need any help, ask and it will be given, okay? The purpose is to ensure that you are able to give the best possible evidence to the inquiry, to assist the inquiry in getting to the truth of the allegations which are being reviewed, okay? Now, what I'd like to do, in terms of your evidence, so you know where we are going, is to very briefly deal with your career, because that will help put in context some of the evidence you are able to give. And then what I'd like to do is to take you through various information that you have received at different times about concerns you now have regarding the conduct of UKSF. And I'd like to ask you what you have done with those allegations, what has happened after you've spoken to people, who have you spoken to, and how you now feel about it as at today. So to give you some sort of a roadmap, that's where I'd like to try and go.
Right.
The idea is to take you through your statement in the order in which it was written. And again, I'll be pointing you to individual paragraphs. But as I said only 2 minutes ago, if you get confused, that's my fault, not yours. The purpose of the questions are not to confuse you. They are, I hope, to help you.
Great. Thank you.
So, dealing with what I anticipate might be the easiest bits straight away. Currently, you are a Member of Parliament for Plymouth Moorview, is that correct?
I am guilty of that.
And you are the Minister for Veterans Affairs.
I am.
And you set out in paragraphs 4, 5 and 6 what you described as your relevant professional background. And what I'd like to do, please, is to invite you to look to those 3 paragraphs, and then I'll ask you just a little bit about them, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
You've recorded in your statement that you joined the British Army in 2002 and that you served until 2014.
Yep.
And items of relevance that you'd identified for the inquiry were these: that you had served operationally in Afghanistan on 3 separate occasions.
Yep.
The first with 29 Commando in 2006.
29 Commando.
I apologise, with 29 Commando in 2006. Then you were attached to UK Special Forces from 2008 until early 2009.
That's correct.
And then you served with 1 and 2 Lancs in the summer of 2010.
Correct.
So 3 separate periods of deployment in Afghanistan.
Correct.
And do you feel that that gives you a benefit of personal knowledge that enables you to bring insight to bear on some of the allegations that have been brought to your attention?
Yeah, I mean, I think operating in Afghanistan has a unique context. I think every war, every conflict has unique natures to it, and this was no different. I think it's very fortunate in a way because I was able to operate at a very tactical level. When I first went there, I was commanding an Afghan Kandak of 92 Afghans and 3 UK soldiers under my command, right through to the strategic when we were operating in the UKSF task force, and gave me a sort of holistic view of the conflict, what was going on, what we were trying to do, successes, failures, and so on.
After you left the army in 2014, you were elected to Parliament. Was it in 2015?
Yes.
You became a member of the Defence Select Committee between 2 periods. First, July 15 to May 17,
Yeah.
and then September 17 until November 19. And then, if we just deal with paragraph 6 very briefly, on the 28th of July of 2019, you were appointed by the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson to the position of Minister for Defence, People and Veterans. And that was a position that you held up until 2001. You've also held the following cabinet positions.
2021.
2021, thank you. You've also held the following cabinet positions: Minister for Veterans Affairs between July and September 2002, and that was at the appointment of the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And then currently, Minister for Veterans Affairs, appointed in October 2022, appointed by the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak.
Correct.
And as part of your time as Minister for Veterans Affairs, have you sought to advance the cause of current and former members of the British Armed Forces?
Yeah, I think that's fair, Mr. Glasgow. I have, I essentially completed my combat service in 2010. I then embarked on a period of, I took commando training for those who wish to be commandos in the army. I had for a long time struggled with the difference between what our ministers and our prime ministers and so on said about veterans, and then how it felt to be a veteran. And I'd seen these veterans' experiences, I'd seen the families of the bereaved, I'd seen what it felt like to see that difference play out in public. In 2012, we reached a moment in this country when more of our people who were serving and veterans that year took their own lives than were killed in Afghanistan, which was still a relatively high intensity combat operation. The BBC made a programme about it. There were a couple of cases that really stood out to me. There's a chap called Lance Sergeant Dan Collins, who had served on a tour similar to mine. He came home, he struggled to seek help for his mental health challenges. And in the end, he went up to Senny Bridge, where everyone does a lot of training and is a horrible place, and made a video for his mum and said, look, I've tried everything, I've looked everywhere, but there is just no help in this country. And he then took his own life. And for me, that was a watershed moment, and I was determined that this country would change the way at government level that it looked after veterans. I then decided that I would try and become a member of Parliament, and throughout that process, clearly there's been a number of veterans issues that I've sought to address. Probably chiefly amongst them around, mental health care and physical care is this issue of lawfare, where my generation of combatants were chased by individuals like Phil Shiner and others on what proved to be false allegations of torture and killing, and essentially besmirching what I had seen with my own eyes on operations. This extended, obviously, back to Northern Ireland, and I was intimately involved in what that felt like for Northern Ireland veterans as well. And so, yes, when I came into my position as the Minister for Veterans Affairs, ending the vexatious nature of the pursuit of veterans through lawfare, whether it was Northern Ireland, Afghanistan, Iraq, was a major campaign of mine, and I started that by initiating the 2016 subcommittee inquiry into the Iraq historical allegations team.
And can I pick up on that and something else you just mentioned? When you made your maiden speech to the House of Commons, did you in fact refer to the soldier who'd taken his life, Dan Collins, to identify that as a particular motivating factor for what you wanted to try to change when you came into office? Yeah,
absolutely. I feel politics is obviously very up and down, and so on, but I've worked hard to be consistent in my missions, and I mentioned Dan Collins in my maiden speech. I mentioned individuals who had died in my arms in combat. I had mentioned individuals who had performed exceptionally well, and they are I feel like I'm incredibly privileged to end up where I am, and I feel I have a responsibility to those individuals.
And when we think of that responsibility for a moment, you mentioned one of the other principal motivating factors for you was the concern that you had with vexatious litigation against current or former members of the armed forces. And you touched upon the 2016 subcommittee for the Defence Select Committee, which you were involved in, which looked into the Iraq Historic Allegations Team investigations that had been set up in 2010 to look at allegations made by Iraqi civilians of abuse that they were said to have suffered at the hands of members of the British Armed Forces. Yeah,
so I mean, I guess what motivated me to do it was that some of my personal friends were involved in this, and I'd seen the effect it had had on them, and it had completely destroyed their lives. For me, it was always, I never put beyond my mind that individuals would not have stepped up to the plate on operations, because you see some of that yourself. As much as I saw courage, I saw cowardice in contact. As much as I saw moral courage, I saw moral weakness as well. It is not a perfect organisation. However, the industrial level of these claims, the amount of public money that was being made by those bringing the claims, and the level of the allegations, it was clear to me that that would require systemic breakdown in an organisation that I knew intimately in the British Army that was just not plausible. And so I started to pick it apart and find out what had actually happened. And then when I did, the whole thing fell apart.
In terms of the report itself, the report was entitled "Who Guards the Guardians?" And among the conclusions that you reached, did you conclude that the allegations of abuse by Iraqi civilians have been exploited by two law firms?
I did, yeah.
Did you identify that the caseload of allegations that began with initially 165 ran by the end to over 3,500 in number.
I did.
And did you coin the term lawfare as being a way of describing what you considered to be the exploitory behaviour of lawyers who were subjecting members of the armed forces to long-standing allegations which seemed to have no end?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't claim the term. I was the first to come up with it. I had heard of it before, but I mean, it was clear to me that essentially this prosecution of it was the prosecution of conflict by another means in terms of what lawfare actually was. So it was an attempt to, you have your physical battle and you have your kinetic engagement and so on and so forth. But then it was like this separate sphere into which it got, where essentially it became, at times, although very serious issues, felt like a bit of a game for legal teams and for lawyers to try and make public money, try and make money for themselves off the backs of some of the finest people that have defended this nation in foreign shores. And that was something I was not prepared to put up with.
One of the conclusions that was reached by the subcommittee was that the manner in which the armed forces are investigated requires fundamental reform.
Yes.
Did you also, though, conclude that the UK military must be equally subject to the law as any civilian, whether in barracks or on operations?
Mr. Glasgow, it's a very clear point that there is nobody who wishes for individuals to be held to account more than those who are right in their zone, who are operating at this level, who are operating contact operations with the enemy, because it is the only way. It's not about, soldiers don't think about the moral case for, I want to be better than the enemy and so on. That's for bars and history books and so on. You have to have your red lines in order to control men in an extremely violent and emotional engagement. You have to have those red lines. So when those red lines are crossed, there are no more passionate advocates of keeping those red lines than those who actually command men in combat. And I've made that very clear from everything I've done. I've been constantly maligned by actors, both in Northern Ireland and elsewhere, that I want to give a free pass to those who break the law. It could not be further from the truth. I have always instigated that, and that remains my position today.
And Minister, you made that abundantly clear on a number of occasions, but in particular in your statement to the inquiry. Can I invite you to turn on, please, to paragraph 11 initially, and then we'll look together at 12 and 13. Because I want to put in context any observations you've made about industrial scale litigation or vexatious claims, because there are, as you've just identified, two sides to the coin that you were looking at. The work that you undertook, both as part of the subcommittee and as seeking to advance the Overseas Operations Bill, you identify in your statement to the inquiry that the work was never about granting immunity from prosecution to the armed forces. And presumably that's an observation which you've not only made a number of times, but which you still stand by.
Well, of course, yeah.
And you make clear in the next two paragraphs, if we look to paragraph 12 for a moment, where there is clear evidence that crimes have been committed by service personnel, those individuals must be held to account for their actions, irrespective of the time that has passed.
Correct.
We rightly expect our service personnel to hold themselves to high standards, and the vast majority do so. Where those high standards are not upheld, public confidence is undermined, and it is vitally important that wrongdoers are seen to be held to account to ensure that those standards are maintained. So do we see from there a very clear view that you hold about the need to hold wrongdoers to account?
Yeah, I mean, look, That's always been my position. It's never changed. What happens when it becomes into law phase is that everything gets distorted depending on which side of the argument you want to be on. And even today, you could probably pick up a newspaper in Northern Ireland saying that I wanted to excuse the behaviour of every serviceman in the Troubles in Northern Ireland. I mean, it becomes essentially a political campaign. But the truth is, my view has never changed, irrespective of who I've been speaking to, whether it was in Afghanistan at the time when I was conducting these operations, or indeed sat here 14 years later.
Can we just look together very briefly at your paragraph 13? You identify here that industrial scale litigation and vexatious claims do nothing to hold wrongdoers to account and cause real harm to the service personnel and veterans who are caught up in the system.
Yeah, I mean, so I can't adequately express to you the damage done to some of these combatants by the nature of these investigations. I know an individual who was investigated 11 times, having been told that he could move on for his life. That man is a broken man, simply because of his service to this nation. I went with a veteran from Plymouth to Northern Ireland who was arrested at dawn by Northern Ireland police at 6:30 in the morning, taken over to Northern Ireland for questioning, subsequently went through a trial, died alone in his hotel room in the Hilton in Belfast, simply because he was a serviceman, never convicted of anything at all. I can't tell you the damage, the lifetime of damage these things do. Secondarily to that is that the department and the military machine simply cannot cope with getting to the truth of what actually happened, because it's overwhelmed with all these cases. I mean, millions and millions of pounds, 3,500 cases. How does a department deal with that? The idea that there were 3,500 cases of abuse in Iraq, if you're a serviceman, is insane. Obviously, you will get bad actors in every organisation, but that is a catastrophic breakdown of law and order in a major institution in this country, right? That has not happened. And I'm surprised that it took me to come in to actually call that out and put a stop to it. Surprised and very disappointed in my kind of senior commanders and senior leaders within the Ministry of Defence.
So can I make sure that I've understood your position, which I think has been made very clear? But the point at which you approach this is no desire to seek immunity from anyone who has committed any form of wrong, particularly a criminal wrong, while serving.
Absolutely.
And you have a strong desire that those individuals, where they have let down the very high standards that are put upon them, that they should be held to account and to answer for what they've done wrong.
It's absolutely vital in the existence of these units and the ability to prosecute operations.
But insofar as the drowning of the MOD or any other investigation in thousands of allegations, why might that be wrong? Just so we understand, what if there are thousands of allegations? What is wrong?
Because any department will have finite resources to investigate these instances, and if it is hit with an industrial scale bow wave of claims, it is clearly going to focus on fighting them rather than the 2 or 3 individuals within that organisation who may put their hand up and say, there's something not right here, I'm not happy with this.
When you were appointed as a minister by Boris Johnson, was one of the specific tasks he gave to you to look into this particular issue?
It was, particularly concerning Northern Ireland.
So do we understand from that your concerns about industrial scale litigation and vexatious claims were shared by other people in government, including the Prime Minister? Oh
yeah, look, I'm not going to be shy about it. I ran a pretty brutal campaign against my own government in 2016, 17, 18 to get this on the political agenda. I've had to do that for Veterans Affairs from the start of my political career to this point. I never wanted to be a politician. I never wanted to really be in politics. I didn't vote before I was an MP. I'm not particularly interested in the politics. For me, it was about looking after these people, treating these people fairly, And so, yeah, I'd run a big campaign. I'd got newspapers on board. I had got other MPs on board. I mean, there was a Prime Minister's questions where Prime Minister Theresa May got hit by 4 questions in a row on this. And I knew at that time the dam was breaking and that this was finally on the political agenda.
In terms of the work that you then did to get this onto the political agenda and the impact that that must have had within the community from which you come, and by that I mean the military community rather than the constituency you serve, were your efforts well received by former colleagues or former members of the armed forces?
Yeah. But it's not a question of sort of, you obviously do it for them, but you don't do it to be well received. You do it for the professionalism involved. And there's a secondary issue here, which I feel very strongly about, which is the besmirching of a whole generation of service of these operations, which I'm just simply not prepared to put up with. Because I saw individuals do the most incredibly selfless acts, demonstrate the very best of everything we try to achieve from the moment you sign up to the commandos or to another force, and lose their life in the process. And I'm not prepared to let their service be besmirched by individuals who are frankly making things up to make money. And that goes in Northern Ireland, Afghanistan and Iraq.
Insofar as people were supportive from within your military community of the work that you were doing, did people approach you to tell you of allegations about misconduct in Afghanistan?
So there was a general sort of pall odour around the switchover in organisations from 2009 to 2010 on the operations that I had just finished and then were taken over by UKSF 1, and that's the sort of very earliest, but no one really said anything to me personally because it wasn't within my remit. I just became aware of the sort of, when you're in the military, it's, rumours go around all the time and you have to be really, you kind of notice it but you don't as well, because you know that people say things that aren't true. I mean, I've heard some ridiculous things about me from my time in the military. It was only really came to my attention properly when I was doing the IHAT stuff, and there was this stuff outstanding from Afghanistan, from UKSF 1, that I became more kind of aware and different, it was raised with me. I don't recall specific conversations, but it was raised with me on a few occasions.
Can I try to break down the difference in some of the bits you've just mentioned? You've described a general pallor or odour that there was. Is that something that you noticed at the time whilst on deployment?
No. So I then went to, after 2010, I had a pretty, after 2008, 2009, I wanted to become so UKSF trained, okay? So there's a subtlety in the qualifications of particularly my job involving joint fires. And so instead of going to the unit for a defined job and a defined purpose and a defined operation, I wanted to change my career and go and be permanently in that in one of those organisations. I had a qualification at the time that meant I had to do another tour of Afghanistan in 2010, and my qualification was in the terminal control of indirect weapon systems, so helicopters, jets, missiles, long-range guns and so on. And essentially we operated in small teams attached to ground forces and we would prosecute operations in that manner. It's quite a long course to qualify, and I understood. I'll be honest with you. I fought it. I didn't want to go back to Afghanistan for the third time in 4 years, and I knew where I was going, and there were a lot of injuries, a lot of people getting shot, and you have this feeling when you spend a lot of time in combat, you have this feeling that it's a very strange feeling, but you kind of feel like your luck is like a bank account, and it starts going down, and with that, your kind of fear starts creeping up as well. And I'll hold my hand up. I didn't want to go back, but I went back that summer, and we had probably the most brutal time of my time in service. I occupied a patrol base that had never been occupied for a fighting season before, and the Taliban were literally trying to come over the gate on a Sunday morning, and we were shooting them off the walls and all sorts. So it was a pretty brutal time. Subsequent to that, I wanted to go back to the other unit that I'd been serving with during the period 2008-2009. I then embarked on a series of selection courses, and whilst you're on selection, you mix with people from that unit, both units, and indeed support units, and that's where I was kind of immersed in some of these stories as well. I was on selection for a long time. I passed all the physical requirements, but I was deemed unsuitable at one of the phases, and that was that. And I went back to my regular career. But again, stories were pretty clear during that time. But also, clearly, I met a cohort of individuals who then went on to have careers in those units as well that I've retained contact with today. It became it wasn't sort of, people don't sit around talking about these things. It's just, when it just, it would just sort of come up in conversation. Why are you, an army officer, going to UKSF 3? Why are you not going to UKSF 1? Things like that. And that caused a few issues, and probably ultimately led to what happened to me,
So just to make sure again that I've understood this, the pallor or the odour to which you referred is something you became aware of whilst you were undertaking training to see if you could become a member of UKSF, and it was something that you became aware of through conversations that you overheard or were party to?
Party to.
And whilst we must always be careful before we descend into rumour or gossip, but since you've labelled it as pallor or odour, can you give us some idea of the sense of what the pallor or odour was that you took away from these conversations?
Just a sort of a level of discomfort. But I'll be honest with you, when I was nothing special in the military, right? I had a very average career, a very average time. I was part of a very, very small percentage of military personnel served in contact with the enemy, in combat. Very, very small numbers, and I was very fortunate to be in that group. So when you talk about combat with your fellow operators, you will, stories will go around, but you have to be very, you have to be very clear as to the difference between fact and fiction and rumour and what's not true. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of things you hear are absolute garbage. Some of it was about me. Some of it was about people that I knew not to be true. But some stuff comes back time and again, and then it has little nuances to it that you think, that's not quite right. And that's where these stories started to have a few problems.
Mercer, you told us to Glasgow just now that when you embarked on these selection courses, you became quite immersed in some of these stories. Can you help us a little bit more with what these stories were that you were engaged?
So if you spend 3 months walking around the hills in Wales, that's a long time to have to exchange stories with other people from those units. And clearly by that stage we had been involved in operations in Afghanistan for a long time. I had done a tour myself with one of these units, and I was aware of these stories coming to light, but if I'm honest with you, I can't remember the sort of individuals that I would have had those conversations with. That's why I use the term pala or oda, because I didn't have a kind of lightning rod where someone said to me, this is what I did, and suddenly an alarm went off. It was more a sort of generic series of stories rather than something I could hang my hat on to actually put my hand up on.
Was the pala or oda a positive one?
No.
Was it directed at UKSF in general or particular parts of UKSF?
Well, it was directed at specific. It was directed at specific parts of UKSF. Yeah.
And you spoke of officers choosing to go to UKSF 3 rather than UKSF 1. Why was it that you gave that as an example in support of the pala or oda that you were trying to explain to the inquiry?
Because people would ask you why, and you would have to. And I was a commando by background, and UKSF 3 felt like a more natural home to me. And culturally, I felt I was a better fit with that organisation. And in my dealings, and I certainly don't, tar everyone with the same brush, but in my dealings, I think that was probably a fair assessment.
No, again, it's my fault. You may have misunderstood. I wasn't asking about why you looked to UKSF 3 rather than UKSF 1. What you told the inquiry was that whilst you've been undergoing the selection procedure, that there had been conversations you'd overheard where officers other than yourself had been asked, why are you going to UKSF 3 rather than UKSF 1?
Yeah.
And you gave that as an example of the sort of information that helped inform the pala or oda.
Yeah, because of the way they spoke to them. Yeah, because of the way they spoke to officers. Because of the way that unit. I'd had some pretty unpleasant experiences with individuals from that unit prior to this. There was an incident in Afghanistan in 2010 when I was conducting an operation and 3 soldiers from one Lancs, or it may have been 2 Lancs, but 3 of them were shot with 1 round, stacked up against the building. And so there then became this suspicion that there was a sniper operating in my area of operations. And so a team from UKSF 1 was sent to assist us in flushing out some of the bed down locations and potentially finding this sniper. And the problem was I'd been operating in that area for about 5 months. I didn't believe the Taliban had a sniper. I didn't believe they had a sniper's capability. I thought they were very lucky one day. But this was in stark disagreement with the team that had been sent up to investigate, to sort of help us with all this. There were some pretty uncomfortable moments. So, for example, I was in charge within that area of operations of every single target effect going on, right? So any bomb going down range, any missile, anything like that. What that unit wanted to come in and do, and that particular individual, was take that away from me and essentially take over control of those fires in order to prosecute their own operations. And I was not prepared to do that. And that led to almost a sort of physical confrontation in my bed space in Afghanistan in 2010, where I had to deal with a senior NCO from UKSF 1 in very firm terms, and made it clear that wasn't going to happen. We then embarked on a series of operations which I would, at the time, I specifically outlines was not necessary because we had cleared a lot of these compounds already, but this unit wanted to do that again and clear these compounds again. And I remember, you know, blue on blues and British blokes getting shot because they hadn't cleared their deconfliction lines properly, and that led to another point of friction. And then as a final kind of, thing that made me, you know, sort of turn me away from wanting to be part of that organisation, we went out on an operation one day, and it was clear to me that we'd sort of done a search operation and we were extracting down away from that area. And what would happen is the Taliban would always let you in the morning because you got there before they woke up, and then they'd smash you on your way out and lay an ambush for you. And we were extracting, and we got absolutely hammered in this ambush, and a chap was shot in front of me, and I was sat in a vehicle actually at the time, controlling these fires and trying to get the fires to go into the building, into this particular murder hole that was spewing all this automatic fire out at us. And I saw this guy get shot, and he was pulled back, and his GPMG lay on the ground. And one of the operators, the UKSF-1 operators, got out, ran and got the GPMG and started firing from the hip into the murder hole in full view of the enemy. And I remember saying to the guy next to me, this guy's going to get shot, watch this. 3, 2, 1, bang, and he was shot. And I just saw, and I was annoyed because I was like, this guy's just trying to win a medal, right? But at the same time, I was like, I'm going to have to go and get this guy now. And the fire was absolutely withering. I remember I went to open the door of my vehicle and they just shot the wing mirror straight off. And I had to get out. You know, we got him in. And for me, again, you know, it was like, what on earth are we doing? What is going on here? And you know, these are the factors that contributed to me not wanting to join that unit.
Insofar as the negative pallor or odour that you've described related to one unit or another, are you distinguishing between UKSF-1 and UKSF-3?
Yeah, because people would expected me to go to UKSF-1, and I didn't want to go to UKSF-1, I wanted to go to UKSF-3.
And can I check the negative pallor or odour that you picked up on when you were undergoing the procedure for joining UKSF? Did that negative odour or pallor relate to UKSF-1, UKSF-3, or both?
UKSF-1.
And in terms of the negative odour or pallor, the stories or discussions which contributed to that effect, did they relate to matters that had happened in Afghanistan or elsewhere?
I was aware of allegations from other operations, but in particular towards Afghanistan.
Are there any specific allegations in respect of Afghanistan which at that stage, whilst we're dealing with a period of around 2009 or so at that stage, in respect to the allegations you were hearing in connection with Afghanistan, did any of those go higher than rumour or gossip to your assessment?
It always struck me, why would people make this up? It always struck me as to, yeah, why you would make it up. But I'll be honest with you, I was a junior officer going through a rigorous selection process about a year. And, you know, if I'm honest with you put it down to rumour and gossip and bravado and all this rubbish. The trouble is, by that stage, I hadn't really. Yeah, you just put it down to rumour and gossip. But like I say, it generates a pallor, which is why I use the word pallor and not a clear allegation.
Insofar as it may be rumour or gossip or bravado, as you've just said, are you able to describe any specific rumour, gossip or piece of bravado that you received that still sticks in your mind?
No.
Are you able to help Mr. Glasgow with the type of rumour or gossip?
Concerning behaviour on target.
And insofar as that behaviour can be categorised as improper or illegal, is there a distinction to your mind in terms of what was being described to you? Did it fall into the improper category, or did it transgress into potentially illegal?
Well, to my mind, whatever rules of engagement you're operating under, if someone does not present a threat, there is no legal justification for engaging that target.
So if I've just understood what you've said to be correct, insofar as you're able to, rumour or gossip was being provided to you which involved the engagement of people who did not pose a threat.
Yeah.
And was that an engagement that led either to the injury or death of individuals who did not pose a threat?
Yes.
And was it both injury and death, or just injury or just death, or can you not remember?
The conversation wouldn't have got that far.
But as you understood it, the nature of the negative pallor or odour was to the effect that whilst in Afghanistan, UKSF-1 had engaged individuals who did not pose a threat.
That was the pallor of the allegations.
And so we're clear, when you describe engagement of individuals, does that mean that members of UKSF-1 used weapons to fire upon individuals who, according to the rumour or gossip, did not pose a threat?
That was the nature of the odour of the allegations without specificity.
So I'm just looking at the time. I'm conscious that Mr. Mercer hasn't been going for that long, but I know that those who are taking a note of the proceedings have been. And I was asked if at all possible we could have a break every hour or so. I don't know if that would be a convenient moment. If it is so, could I just simply invite you to direct Mr. Mercer, as I'm sure you will, that he's not to discuss his evidence with anyone whilst he's in the course of giving it.
Indeed. We'll break now for 10 minutes, please. And Mr. Mercer, as I say to all witnesses, please do not discuss your evidence with anybody in any break whilst you're giving evidence. All right? 10 minutes, please. Thank you. Mr. Glasgow.
Please, sir. Mr. Mercer, can we move on from the pallor and odour that you've been describing to us over the last 15 minutes or so of your evidence? And can I invite you in your statement to look, please, to paragraph 16? You'd already described to the inquiry the work that you'd done on the Iraq Historic Allegations team and the subcommittee that you had been involved in, which had looked into the allegations that had been made, as we'd identified, over 3,500 in number. And you'd also identified that the work that you'd done had obviously been well received by members within the community from which you had come. But can I in particular ask you about information that was provided to you by serving officers who you knew from your time in the armed forces? Because you've referred to that in your paragraph 16, please. So insofar as former colleagues of yours speaking to you after your work on the subcommittee, did people come to tell you to congratulate you on the work you've done, but also to raise an issue that you needed to be aware of?
Yeah, I was made aware of that.
And what was it that you were made aware of, please, Mr. Mercer?
I was made aware of allegations of incidents that had occurred on operations that crossed the line from rumour and pallor and smell to serious allegations.
So in your mind, you're drawing a distinction between the rumour, the gossip, or the bravado that you'd overheard whilst you've been undergoing training, and now we've got to the extent of what you've just described as serious allegations.
Correct.
And are these serious allegations made to you by one person or by more than one person?
More than one person.
And those individuals that made the serious allegations to you, were they, at the time they reported the allegations to you, were they still members of the military?
Yes.
And you've identified them in your statement by the description serving officers. So more than one serving officer spoke to you about the serious allegations that you needed to be aware of.
I'm trying to disaggregate in my mind when different individuals mention these to me. Yeah, the first time was an officer. Yeah.
And what was it that the officer told you?
That this individual is a personal friend who I had served with in Afghanistan in 2006 and 8 and 9, and he is clearly a friend, and I'm a friend to him, and we went through some pretty intense experiences together, and he was looking out for me insofar as didn't want me to go too far in terms of thinking that there was nothing there that would then bring some, a challenge to the integrity of my argument.
And the argument you're talking about, is that the argument in connection with the subcommittee report that deals with vexatious litigation?
Correct. So the fear was always that, in a lot of these cases, I was using a series of judgments to try and understand what happened in certain cases, with a blend of course, my own experiences, but I knew a lot of people in the military by this stage, and I also knew a lot of people. When I left Afghanistan in 2010, my commanding officer at my dining out said I was probably the most combat experienced terminal controller in the army at that time. So I knew a lot of these people who'd been engaged in a lot of these engagements. And for me, there was always the inherent risk in batting for them and being on their side and being the public face of standing up against the tide of lawfare, political opinion, who frankly had abandoned these people, the press, who seemed determined to believe people like Phil Shiner. There was always the risk that something horrendous was going to come out. And I trusted the system and my cohort to let me know if I was coming close to that risk. And I think this is that moment.
So if we understand the position in which you were in at that time, back in 2017, there or thereabouts.
Yeah, I'm a backbencher, just done the report. I mean, the report came out, right, and this won't be a shock to you, but my relationship with the MOD has never been particularly collegiate on their part. And when I was investigating this stuff with IHAT, clearly I was bucking the trend, because I was saying, look, you've paid out £92 million and you have generated this environment where lawyers can put in spurious claims, you pay out without even investigating, and you're destroying the lives of these veterans. So clearly that presented a challenge to the Ministry of Defence. When the inquiry reported and it said it should be shut down, the Secretary of State at the time tried to kind of preempt the report by saying he was going to shut it down anyway. And this all happened around about the same time.
And when a friend of yours advises you that you need to be careful, have I understood this correctly, that you're trying to strike a balance between fighting against what you regard as substantial litigation and vexatious litigation in the thousands of claims? So that's one side of the balance. On the other side, you want to ensure that if you're fighting it, there isn't going to be truth in any allegation that comes back to bite you.
Correct.
So at its basic level, if you're going to champion the claim that this is vexatious litigation, the last thing you want is to discover the next day that, in fact, within these claims, there are some which are, in fact, true.
Correct.
So when your friend is advising you that you need to take care, was he advising you that there were matters you needed to be aware of before you pushed the agenda that this was vexatious litigation and nothing else?
Correct.
And this is a good friend of yours
Yep.
who presumably felt able to speak to you candidly about matters that you needed to be aware of.
Yeah, but it was a private conversation. It wasn't. He wasn't approaching me in a formal capacity in any way. It was a private conversation.
Which enabled him, no doubt, to be completely candid and open with you about what he wanted to say.
Of course. I mean, I have lots of very candid and open relationships with lots of people across defence and other areas of the country, yeah.
If we need to talk about other candid discussions you may have had, we'll come to them, but I'd like to focus on this one for the moment, please. This is a candid conversation with a good friend of yours in which he reports to you, have I understood it right, serious allegations? Because those are the words you used.
Serious allegations backed up by allegations not only of the behaviour on target, but then the subsequent efforts to... Because my principal concern at that stage, as a backbencher outside the department, is do ministers know? So I feel, the only thing I have in all this is my integrity, right? So if someone approaches me with that, the only thing I can say to them is, do ministers know about this? And I was assured ministers did know, and that is my duty done. I'm not a minister in the department.
I'm not asking at this stage about what the ministers may or may not have known.
Sure.
I'm asking about the nature of the conversation you had with your friend, and you've just told us that the serious allegations concern matters of what happened on target, your words, and also things that happened afterwards. So there's two strands to this allegation, if I've understood it correct. Something that's happened at the time that an operation is ongoing, and something that's happened after the operation. So what's the nature of the allegation, please?
That essentially attempts were made to sort of game the system to sort of... I feel the word cover-up is too strong, right? But to block a real aggressive, brutally honest assessment and investigation into what happened. For example, the things that you've already covered in this inquiry around computer systems being wiped and things like that.
Well, leaving aside what we may have already covered, can I just make sure I've understood what it was that your friend told you? In connection with this serious allegations of what happened on target, What did he tell you those serious allegations were?
Well, they concerned the pallor of allegations that we've already covered, and behaviours on target that we've already covered this morning. But then it moved on to how there were concerns around how that unit had been investigating itself, and what investigators had found when they started looking into it. And that's the thing that started to kind of prick my conscience, to make me think something is not right here, and then shift that paradigm shift that we've talked about a number of times from rumour, bravado and PAL across to allegations. Why would you do that if you're not covering something up? Why did this happen? And asking intellectual questions from an informed standpoint as to why certain things were found.
I'm sorry to keep going back to this, but I want to understand what it was that your friend actually told you. Dealing with the serious allegations that related to what happened on target.
Yep.
What did he actually say had happened on target that you needed to be aware of, Mr. Mercer?
It wasn't so much that was covered, because I was aware of the allegations already. It was things like a computer that could do what's called keystroke recovery, so you can see where operational reports have been changed, and that the Ministry of Defence had invested money in that. And so this was likely to be a bigger investigation and a bigger subject, and you just need to be aware of it when you're on this crusade to look after the majority of veterans not impacted by this. You need to be aware that there is something going on here, and we don't quite know what it is.
And when he said we don't quite know what it is, what did you understand him to mean by that?
That nobody really knew.
Did he describe to you any allegations of what happened on target? Because those are the words you used about 7 minutes ago. So I just want to understand what it was he said about what had happened on target that you needed to be aware of.
Well, the central allegations of this inquiry is concerned around the killing of individuals who pose no threat.
So your friend warned you that there were serious allegations that people who posed no threat had been killed.
Yes.
In Afghanistan?
Yes.
And by UKSF, or did he distinguish between UKSF 1, UKSF 3?
Everyone knew who it was.
Who was it?
Well, everyone knows the unit concerned.
Is the unit concerned UKSF 1?
Yeah.
Right. So, your friend advised you that at least he believed that there had been killings conducted by UKSF 1 whilst on deployment in Afghanistan.
No, he didn't say that. He said you need to be aware this is the situation. You have these allegations. You have the department investing in equipment to try and understand why operational reports were changed. Just be aware that this is a situation that you need to be aware of. That was the defined limit of that conversation.
If we look together to your paragraph 16, can we do that, please, Mr. Mercer?
Sure.
What you described there is that you were told about serious allegations of incidents that occurred within UKSF that made members of that community feel very uncomfortable. What do you mean by those words, please, Mr. Mercer?
I mean that around that time I was also approached by another individual who was working in the task group at that time, who asked if he could see me. I'm just trying to make sure I deconflict the times correctly and when this individual approached me. I think he actually approached me when I was in the department later, so it wouldn't have been at that time. But making the members of that cohort feel uncomfortable, of that community feel uncomfortable, I mean that had been a regular conversation over many years with individuals who had gone on from my course, for example, to serve in that community.
So you had had regular conversations with individuals who had gone on to serve as part of UKSF, in which they told you of serious allegations.
No, I mean, these are my friends, and they go away and they conduct a tour. You come back. What was it like? What was it like? How was it different to our time? What was this like? What was that like? You know, you don't. You know, this isn't a regular thing, but they may, you know, come to your house for the weekend with their family, and you'll go to the pub with them and have a conversation and just, you know, check they're okay, check they're dealing with it all right. You know, what's it like now? Because conflict changes so quickly. And I was aware of these allegations.
But in the course of the conversations you're having with your friends, were you discussing those allegations that you are aware of?
I was discussing the general practice of what you would call, you know, techniques on target.
Okay. Can we just look together at what you wrote in your statement in November last year? In approximately 2017, following my work on the IHAT inquiry, I was told by serving officers whom I knew from my time in the armed forces that I'd done a great job, but I needed to be careful in relation to Afghanistan because there were serious allegations of incidents that occurred within UKSF that made members of that community feel very uncomfortable. What you've written there is that you were told by serving officers, so does that mean more than one?
More than one person mentioned it to me. I'm just trying to disaggregate in my mind specifically when those scenarios were. This wasn't one individual, clearly.
So leaving aside the question of timing, and I'm not seeking to put a particular time frame on this, what I want to clarify with you is this, Mr. Mercer, and as you've just done it for me.
Multiple sources told me that, yes.
So multiple sources told you that there were serious allegations of incidents that had occurred in Afghanistan.
Correct.
And the serious allegations relate to people who are being engaged on target who did not pose a threat.
Correct.
And the allegations also extended to the question of what might have been done after those allegations had come to light as concerns the reporting.
Correct.
So you had two strands in your mind at that time that people were warning you to be alive to.
Yeah. The sort of thing you talk about, you talk about compound clearance, for example. There are a number of different techniques to clear a compound.
I'm not going to ask you about the techniques to clear a compound at the moment. If we come to do that, we'll deal with that later on in the course of your evidence. What I want to talk to you about is this. I'm just simply trying to unpick the words in your statement. Multiple sources told you that there were serious allegations in the way that UK, is it SF1 or was it all members of UKSF?
Within UKSF1.
So multiple sources told you that there were serious allegations of the way in which UKSF1 had conducted themselves on operation in Afghanistan.
Correct.
And that those serious allegations concerned the engagement of targets who did not pose a threat.
Correct.
And that in addition to that, there were also serious allegations about what might have happened in the aftermath as concerns the reporting or investigation into those allegations.
Correct.
And you were being warned by numerous sources so that you didn't find yourself out on a limb.
Correct.
Because you recognised and they recognised that if there were serious allegations that might be true, you could be left looking particularly foolish when you were complaining about industrial scale vexatious litigation against the military.
Correct.
Insofar as those numerous individuals are concerned, they were friends of yours?
Yep.
And presumably still friends of yours?
Yep.
And are you able to provide their names to the inquiry, please?
Not at this stage, no.
Why not?
because this has been a prolonged saga for me over many years, and my faith in the system to interrogate these issues is not where it needs to be for that to happen.
Well, the ability of this inquiry to interrogate the issues is considerably hampered if you won't tell us who spoke to you. So I'm going to...
Of course, but you come into this place with very little, and you leave this place with very little as well. But the one thing you can hold on to is your integrity, and I will be doing that with these individuals.
Well, at the moment, you've come into this place armed with the knowledge of the names of the people who spoke to you.
Because they spoke to me. They're not direct hand witnesses. They were not there.
That's not what I asked, Mr. Mercer. You have come into this courtroom armed with the knowledge that you can provide the names of people who spoke to you who have made very serious allegations about UKSF1. Yes?
Well, I haven't come in here armed with anything. I've simply given you a statement that reflects that position.
So, back in November of 2023, you determined it was appropriate to identify what you had been told by multiple sources.
In order to help your inquiry, yes.
And presumably you must have thought to yourself, if I name multiple sources, someone's going to ask me at some point what their names are.
I was aware that that would happen, yeah. But with the greatest respect, Mr. Glasgow, I have dealt with these allegations over a number of years, dealt with different groups over a number of years. There's a reason people have candid conversations with me so I can understand what actually happened and separate rumour and speculation and gossip from what actually happened in order to protect myself, but also to make sure there is 100% integrity in everything that I've done around legislation and, you know, and my behaviour elsewhere. And the simple reality is at this stage is that I'm not prepared to burn them in order when they're in my judgment. There is you are already speaking to people who have far closer knowledge of what was going on because of the repercussions that may fall on them.
This has nothing to do with the integrity of the legislation that you sought to pass because it's been passed, Mr. Mercer. And this isn't an attack on your integrity in any way at all. I'm asking you quite simply this. You have told the inquiry in a statement and in evidence that multiple people have warned you about allegations circulating around UKSF. And clearly you thought it important that the inquiry know that information.
Yep.
Otherwise you wouldn't have written it down.
Yep.
And you wouldn't have answered the questions.
Mm-hmm.
And it must have been blindingly obvious to you that at some point during the course of today, someone like me was going to say to you, can we have the names of the multiple sources?
Indeed.
Okay, so presumably you've spoken to those multiple sources before coming to give evidence to say, would you mind if I gave your name?
Well, that's an assumption you've made. That's not what I've said, is it?
Well, let's just assume for a moment that that's the blindingly obvious thing to do.
It's not the blindingly obvious thing to do.
You knew you were
It may be to you, Mr. Glasgow, but it's not to me.
Well, let's try this, Mr. Mercer. You knew you were coming to give evidence, yes? You've known for some time you were coming to give evidence.
I'm so sorry, but I don't understand the point of your question. Of course I knew I was coming to give evidence.
And you knew that the evidence was to be about what's in your witness statement.
Yes.
And you must have known that you were going to be asked about the multiple sources.
Yes.
And you were going to be asked to give their names.
Yes.
And one or more of them might actually be willing to have their name given to the inquiry.
Potentially they may be, and that would be for them to come forward to the inquiry. You've made multiple efforts to get individuals to come forward to the inquiry. If they were first-hand witnesses to this behaviour, then that would be a different calculation, but they were not.
No, but you obviously thought what they had to say to you was important because you mentioned it in your statement.
For me, it's about getting to the truth of the matter, yeah.
Well, no one can get to the truth of the matter, Mr. Mercer, if you won't give us the names.
Well, they can, because you are speaking to individuals who have first-hand knowledge of this, provided everyone tells the truth, you will get to the bottom of this of these allegations.
So, do I understand that you are refusing to help the inquiry?
No, I'm not refusing to help the inquiry. Indeed, I volunteered to help the inquiry. So, of course, that's rather churlish way of looking at it.
Would you like to write the names down on a piece of paper so that only inquiry knows them?
No, because it is not. It is. I will look at it again, and I will always reassess and attempt to help the inquiry in any way that I can. But I have to retain my own integrity in this process, and at every stage, as you will see from the evidence and that has been provided in disclosure, people have tried to game me from that department, and I'm not prepared to indulge in that further.
Mr. Mercer, I'd like you to reflect on this
I will, of course, sir.
aspect, if you'd be so kind. I can appreciate that the last few years have been difficult, and I understand the work that you've done, but you can rest assured as to the integrity of this inquiry and its determination to get to the truth. And you can also rest assured that I will be the judge of what is and is not appropriate, and I will look at everything very carefully. But as Mr. Glasgow has said, it's important that we have all the evidence and that we talk to all the relevant people. So I'd like you to reflect on this, if you'd be so kind, in the course of perhaps the short adjournment at lunchtime, and we can then perhaps discuss it again. All right?
Sir.
Let's leave aside then those who advised you about matters that they might not have known about firsthand, okay? Because you've drawn a distinction between friends of yours that don't have first-hand knowledge. Can we look together at paragraph 17 of your witness statement?
Oh, yes.
And paragraph 17, if I've understood it correct, concerns a first-hand allegation that was made to you. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Yeah, but not, yes, different to the ones we were just talking about, but yes.
Yes. I'm just seeking to distinguish the difference between the second-hand allegations we've been dealing with for the
yes,
last
but at the same
half
time,
hour.
you're trying to push these two allegations together. They are very separate. One is dealing with behaviour on target. The other, this is this particular allegation that is first-hand is to do with sort of preparation of those acts rather than the behaviour on target. So the two are separate.
I haven't got to the nature of the allegation yet, but I'm just seeking to clarify with you that paragraph 17 deals with somebody who gave you first-hand information.
About a different allegation, yes.
We'll get there in a moment, Mr. Mercer. So the allegation that you were made aware of by that person was that he had been asked to carry a dropped weapon. Is that correct?
Correct.
And this is somebody who was a serving member of the UKSF.
Yep.
And as part of his period on deployment in Afghanistan, someone had asked him to carry a dropped weapon.
Yeah.
And what did you understand a dropped weapon to refer to, please?
Look, a dropped weapon is when you have a series of weapons that cannot be linked with NATO forces, and that it would appear after my time that it became practice for some units to take these on the ground in order to. Well, I don't know why you would do it, but if I was to go down that line, it would be so that you could place them with unarmed combatants or unarmed individuals.
Well, since you want to go down that line, that's exactly what you said in your witness statement, isn't it?
Indeed.
Right. So what you said in your witness statement was that I understood this to mean he'd been asked to carry an extra weapon, one that could not be linked to NATO forces, to be dropped on the body of a person to make it appear as though they had been a legitimate target as a combatant. So as you understood it, the purpose of a dropped weapon was to place it beside the body of somebody who had been killed, because if a photograph was taken, it would give the impression that that dropped weapon had been held by that person, and therefore might allow somebody to say he was armed, presented a serious threat to life, and therefore he was engaged.
Indeed, Mr. Glasgow.
Right. And this was a first-hand allegation made to you by a member of the UKSF.
Correct.
And was this UKSF 1 or another part of the UKSF?
This was a UKSF 3 member.
And who had asked this UKSF 3 member to carry a dropped weapon?
I don't recall that part of the conversation.
Well, you must have asked.
I was asked, is how the conversation went.
Well,
I didn't say who asked you to do it.
You didn't?
No.
Did you not think that might be important to know who'd asked him to carry a dropped weapon?
I think when you're engaged in these conversations, you know when you go too far and you won't get any more information.
And who was the person that gave you that first-hand information? Will you write the name of that individual down?
No,
Why not?
for the reasons I've outlined.
What, your integrity?
For the reasons I've outlined.
Well, that was the reason you outlined, that your integrity would suffer if you were to write names down.
Yep.
Well, you sought to distinguish 12 minutes ago the difference between friends of yours who told you about things they didn't know firsthand, and that was why you didn't need to name them. And now we've got somebody who gives you first-hand information. So I'm asking you to write down the name of that person and to provide it to the inquiry.
Yeah. I mean, I'm obviously not going to do that. That was a private conversation with that individual, but I will reflect on the chair's comments, and I'll reflect very carefully on those.
Well, it may have been a private conversation, but it's a private conversation you chose to set out in some detail in your witness statement.
To help you get to the truth.
And you're trying to help us get to the truth by not giving us the name of the person that gave you the information. How do you think the inquiry can get to the truth, Mr. Mercer, if you deny us access to a potentially important witness?
Because I've seen your list of witnesses, and you have important first-hand witnesses on there, and they are the individuals you need to speak to.
You have no idea who our witnesses are, Mr. Mercer.
I've seen a list of them.
Now, you've seen a list of names, Mr. Mercer. You don't know whether they are witnesses or not, so don't be silly. Let's be sensible together. Do you think it's important for the inquiry to speak to people who have first-hand evidence?
Of course, but you have to do this in a way that is going to get you to the truth. That it's not going to. It's not so that at the end of this inquiry you can stand up and say, "Well, we asked everyone and they said no." The whole point, as you know, and I want to tread very carefully, sir, because I would never presume to direct anything like this, but we have to try and get to the truth. Not a process to say, well, we asked everyone and they said no. We have to get to the truth, and that's different. And you have to be sensitive, and you have to understand what this is like, and you have to understand the organisations, and you have to understand what it's like to be in combat for months on end with people, and then come back to a country that has no interest or idea what it's like to go through. Right? So I recognise what you're trying to do, and I respect that, and I respect you very much, and I respect the inquiry very much. But all I'm interested in is the truth. I'm not interested in the process. I'm interested in the truth.
Well, you can rest assured, Mr. Mercer, that I am interested in the truth, just as you say, and I'm very sensitive to all of these issues.
Thank you, sir.
All right?
Can I invite you to reflect, Mr. Mercer, over the course of the lunch break?
Of course.
And what I'd like to ask you to do is this, please. If, as you say, you are committed to the inquiry uncovering the truth, I'd invite you to work out how you think the inquiry can do that without the assistance of people who know things that have happened.
Well, I can answer that already. I mean, clearly it needs to speak to certain individuals who have this, but there are multiple individuals across these organisations who have knowledge of things like, for example, this drop weapon. What we have to try and do is understand the people who are actually involved, so that we can bottom out, as you've said a number of times, that difference between rumour and gossip and what actually happened. That is only fair for the whole gamut of service personnel who serve with distinction on these operations, some of whom will come into this courtroom. It's fair to the Afghan families, and it's fair to the British Army as an institution. And that is, I have to hold that line, I'm afraid, Mr. Glasgow, at the moment, but I will reflect over lunch and subsequently. I'd suggest, obviously, I'm not going to change my mind today, because some of these individuals are quite damaged by their service, and I think it would be unfair. And I'll be honest with you, my first duty is to them. But I will, of course, reflect very seriously on what the chair has said.
Can I suggest, Mr. Mercer, your first duty is to this inquiry and the truth, and assisting this inquiry in every way you can.
Of course.
You can have faith in this inquiry and its ability to get to the truth in a fair and proper way.
What I would say to
I
that,
don't
sir,
invite
of
you to
course.
respond to that. I just invite you to reflect over lunch about this important issue.
Sure.
All right?
And as you seek to hold the line in the difference between rumour and gossip and important evidence, can we agree that the person whose name you're refusing to give has important direct evidence to give?
I think there are a number of individuals with important direct evidence to give.
That's not what I asked you, Mr. Mercer. I asked you if the individual who you are refusing to name has important direct evidence to give to the inquiry.
I think there are a number of individuals who have important direct evidence to give.
I'll try you one more time, because the question I don't think is a complicated one, but if I need to rephrase it, I will. Do you agree that the person whose name you are refusing to give has important direct evidence to give to the inquiry?
I think there are a number of people who have important direct evidence to give to the inquiry.
So not only are you refusing to give the name of the individual, do you agree you're now refusing to answer what might be thought to be a relatively straightforward question?
No, I don't. I totally refute that I'm refusing to do anything at all. I'm trying to help you in the best way that I possibly can. I haven't come here armed with anything. I haven't refused to do anything.
Well, you have. You've just
I'm
refused
trying
to give the
help
name
you.
of someone.
I'm not refusing. I said I would reflect on the chair's comments.
And what
Right?
you
That is different from refusing, isn't it? And you know that very well.
What you said, Mr. Mercer, was that you would reflect over lunch, and then you told us that you weren't going to change your mind today.
I said it was unlikely. So again, you said something that is definitive when I didn't say that. I said it was unlikely.
Have you spoken to this person?
Not about the inquiry, because you asked me not to speak to anybody about the inquiry.
You wrote a witness statement in which you've described someone telling you something. Did you think to pick up the phone to say to that person?
No, because you gave me a very clear direction that I was not to speak to anyone involved in the inquiry or involved in this.
Would you be willing to speak to this person over lunch?
Not over lunch, no, but I will have. I have taken the chair's remarks very seriously, and I'm going to do everything I can to follow his direction.
Everything you can other than speak to the person.
Mr. Glasgow, this has been a long exercise for me, with very little support, very made my life very, very difficult by others. When all I'm afraid it'll take more than you gently probing me here to change that line. Sorry.
Can we look to the end of your paragraph 16, and I'll stop the gentle probing for a moment. You record that having been told by people who you won't name that there were serious allegations of incidents that had taken place in Afghanistan, that you specifically asked whether ministers were aware of the issues, and you were assured that they were.
Yeah.
Are you prepared to tell us who you asked about ministers being aware of this information?
Well, no, because that would then lead you straight to identify who the individual was, wouldn't it?
Right. In which case, I've now understood. So you asked the people who've given you the information.
I asked one of them, yes.
Right, okay. And so that person told you that as far as he or she was aware, ministers were aware of that allegation.
Correct.
Okay. Did you speak to any of the ministers concerned?
No, I mean, I didn't have that sort of relationship with ministers in the MED. I've always been seen as this kind of pain in the backside. And for me, it was important to make sure that process, it was very important that ministers were aware. What they did with that information was up to them.
Again, if it was important that they were aware, did you think it might be a good idea to clarify with any of them what they were actually aware of?
No.
You didn't think it would be important to say to someone, I've been made privy to serious allegations. I don't want to reveal the name or identity of my sources, but I want to check that government is aware of these very serious allegations?
No, I trusted the system.
You record in paragraph 18 that the allegations that you received of first-hand information, that you found those allegations very concerning.
Oh, yes.
Because it appeared to you that the person that you won't name had been asked to take a weapon with them whilst out on operation that could be used to be planted on someone to give the impression that they'd been shot lawfully rather than unlawfully.
Mm-hmm.
That was your belief?
Yeah.
Right. And you record, I believe that ministers were aware of those allegations. What, did you believe that ministers were aware that people have been asked to carry dropped weapons?
Sorry, where does it say that in my witness
Your
statement?
paragraph 18. I found these allegations very concerning, but I believe that ministers were aware of them.
Yeah.
Your words, Mr. Mercer. Did you believe that ministers were aware that someone, at least one person, had been told to carry a drop weapon?
Well, that's what it says, yes.
I appreciate that's what it said. I'm asking.
Well, that's what I mean.
That's what you mean. So you.
Well, yes.
So you believe. Did you check with ministers that they were actually aware of this very important information?
That wasn't my responsibility. As I've said to you already, I trusted that they were aware, and what those ministers did with that information was up to them.
Did you check what investigation was being carried out?
Absolutely not, no, because I was a backbench member of Parliament. I'm not a minister in the department, and the department runs itself, and that would have been rather impertinent of me.
Okay, well, let's just deal with the question of impertinence. In July 2019, you were a minister.
I was.
Right. You'll find it on paragraph 19 of your statement, Mr. Mercer. And now, a minister and not a backbencher.
Yes.
Did you think to check what investigation was being conducted into an issue that you regarded as very serious and important for your integrity?
I did, Mr. Glasgow.
Right. So who did you speak to? Or do you not want to tell us?
I've written it all in my statement, haven't I?
Okay, well, we'll go through it then. You had a number of meetings with the director of the Directorate of Judicial Engagement Policy, DJEP, yes?
Yep.
The Chief of the Defence Staff?
Yep.
Secretary of State for Defence?
That's what it says.
Anyone else?
Those are the individuals I spoke to.
And did
because
you
I was now a minister.
Did you speak to them one at a time or together?
So I saw DJEP with a group and then on his own. I saw Chief of Defence Staff on his own. I saw Defence Secretary on his own. The only real formal one was with DJEP. The others were informal.
To the best of your recollection, what is it that you told them?
That I have serious concerns that that firstly I'm not well, what I said, the sort of nub of what I said to them was, look, I've come into government to try and bring through legislation to stop things like IHAT happening, and yet I am aware of serious allegations in this space. What's going on?
Did you tell them what the serious allegations were?
They knew what the serious allegations were.
Is that because they told you what the serious allegations were and they matched the allegations you heard, or did you just assume they knew?
No, when you say serious allegations concerning UKSF and Afghanistan, they knew precisely what I was talking about.
And how did they convey that understanding to you?
Either by saying yes or nodding their head, Mr. Glasgow.
No, but how did you know that they were talking about the same serious allegations you were? It could have been an entirely different set of allegations. So did you say to them, these are allegations about what happened on target?
No, because they clearly, you know, there's the issue of on target, but then there's the issue of what was done with computers and reports afterwards. So the whole thing sort of sweeps into a gamut of allegations that, you know, you're right to say, did I ask them about specific allegations concerning different targets and objectives and then subsequent, you know, technical details of keystroke recovery? No. Did I say, I'm aware of these allegations and I'm not prepared to be the political force, because I was receiving a lot of heat for covering up abuses, right? I'm not prepared to be the political force to drive this through whilst these allegations remain unresolved. And that was the nature of my position. And again, you know, that is, I think that's been reflected in the disclosure from the Ministry of Defence.
Did you distinguish between the two types of allegation? On the one hand, what had happened on target, and on the other hand, what had happened afterwards as concerns documentation?
I'm sorry, I don't understand that question.
Did you distinguish between the two types of allegation? On
No.
the one hand, so you did understand. Mr. Mercer, it's not a complicated question. When you spoke to the ministers...
I'm not very bright, I'm sorry, Mr.
Well,
Glasgow.
we're both struggling with the same problem, don't worry. When you spoke to the ministers, did you want to make sure that they knew what you knew?
Of course.
Okay, so presumably you said to them, I just want to check.
Are you aware of these allegations in Afghanistan? Yes, yes. The ones around computers, around killings, yes, yes. We are, I mean, we need to go into more detail than that, but clearly but you know when both people are talking about the same thing. It's obvious, right?
Well, I'm not sure we do, Mr. Mercer, because I don't know that you and I are talking about the same thing at the moment, I'm afraid. But you've just said that during the course of your discussions with them, you raised killings and computers.
Yeah.
Right. So, insofar as there was some
But that's what these allegations surround. Behaviour on target and the recording of that information on computers.
And what, if anything, did they say to you was being done about these allegations?
I'd say my concerns were kind of noted. And then so there was a difference between Secretary of State and CDS. CDS was equally concerned with me, to be fair to him. But I don't think there was that kind of curiosity that I had, because I knew that my name was going to be on the tin for taking this legislation through. Secretary of State was aware of them, but I had a rather interesting relationship with the Secretary of State, and I don't know how raising those concerns would have gone down. Probably not particularly well. I had a fruitful conversation with Director DJEP, Judicial Engagement Policy in the MOD, and it was far more detailed, and it was far more, because I'll be honest with you, in some ways, I wanted to go in and see evidence that would disprove these allegations. So that, because these allegations are horrific. No one wants to believe they're true, right? So what I wanted to understand was how we ended up here. Why have we ended up in a position where we're being JR'd on these cases? What's happened after all these years of Iraq and Afghanistan where we've been lawfared to the maximum? How have we got to a place where this is still happening? And that was the kind of nub of my conversation with DJEP. And then the second part of that is, what would you do if you could do something now? How are we going to stop this from happening, right? Because you as a department are paying out millions of pounds. You're fostering this environment that is paying out millions of pounds, destroying these people's lives, and at the same time, you're not able to deal with serious concerns. So how do we kind of fix that mess? And that was the kind of detail that I got into with DJEP, not the Secretary of State or CDS.
Did you ask what was being done to look into these allegations?
Of course, yeah, of course.
So did you want reassurance from the Director of DJEP that there was a thorough investigation into the allegations?
Of course.
And did he give you that reassurance?
It didn't give me a warm, fuzzy feeling, no. Because as far as I was concerned, when I went into the department, I'm not sure it was a particularly popular move amongst the sort of senior leadership of the Ministry of Defence either civilian or serving. And there was a certain sort of clearing of the air that had to be done with direct judicial engagement, because to my mind, their basic lack of competency had fostered this environment that had destroyed a lot of my friends' lives. So, and I made that very clear from before I went to the department. So obviously there was a bit of, I had to try and understand, because I don't think people are bad, and I don't believe in cover-ups. I don't think, they made a deliberate decision. We think all the troops are bad and they did all this bad stuff, so we're just going to pay out the money. I don't think they thought that. I think they thought, what's the easiest way to protect the department and make this problem go away? So I had to have a very sort of honest conversation with them, and I did. And, at times it was difficult, without a shadow of a doubt. I always made clear to these individuals that I thought they were equally to blame for the fostering of the lawfare environment as much as the Phil Shiners of this world, because they couldn't bring in practices to protect themselves or protect the guys and girls from these claims. And at the same time, if you're just going to pay out money like a cash machine, £92 million, of course the lawyers are going to keep coming, because they're just sucking up a fire hose of public money. And these individuals made huge amounts of public money. So, there was a basic misunderstanding of the very concept of lawfare and what it was about in Director Judicial Engagement's team. And clearly when that collided with me, who'd been campaigning on this stuff for a long time, it was going to be a bit uncomfortable for a while.
I'm told that we need a short break for those who are operating the note. Could I ask just for 5 minutes if that's acceptable?
Break for 5 minutes.
Please, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. Break for 5 minutes until 25 past, please. Thank you. Mr. Glasgow.
Please you, sir. Mr. Mercer, I'd asked you shortly before we broke if you sought a reassurance from the Director of the Judicial Engagement Policy whether or not there was a thorough investigation being undertaken. And what you'd said was that his response to you didn't give you a warm and fuzzy feeling.
Yeah.
So do we understand from that that when an investigation was described to you, you weren't left with the sense that it was going to be thorough?
In my experience, the MOD was terrible at investigating itself. There were things that happened over many, in the course of my work on IHAT and Afghanistan. Clearly, cases like Baha Musa were brought to my attention. Clearly, unacceptable behaviours, and I had very little faith that the MOD had the ability to hold itself to account.
So, whilst you understood there was an investigation,
Yeah.
you had no faith in it.
I thought that now I was in the camp. I had to try and make the try and bring integrity to the process, right? So there was no point just saying, I don't believe your investigation, all this stuff. I then started to talk more in detail about, right, well, what did you actually do to investigate these claims? So you've been presented with these claims. What have you actually done to interrogate these claims and to find out what's going on? And I sort of got more into the nitty-gritty of the investigation to understand what they had done to investigate the claims, yeah.
And when you send it into the nitty-gritty, was that with the director or with those who were carrying out the investigation?
Sure. So, I mean, I would ask these questions, but often people were not able to answer them. So the director and others would go away and get answers or set me up a series of meetings with other individuals to try and understand specific concerns I had.
Did that allay the concerns you had?
I mean, I'm sure we'll come onto this, but there were specific. I didn't think there was bad faith on behalf of the investigators at all. I just thought the big problem you had was that these are very deliberate, sensitive operations, and if you've not conducted those operations, you can give a series of reasons for a series of outcomes, right? And you can have potentially what the untrained eye would consider would be plausible explanations. The problem you have, if you've done those operations and you're intimately involved with that cohort, when you start seeing these explanations, you're like, yeah, that is not plausible. And that becomes the problem.
So
because then you feel like you're kind of being undermined by your own side, right? Because you're saying to these people, look, I want to bring in this legislation to protect the majority of these of servicemen and women, right? But I need you to tell me everything. Tell me everything so that I know the entire political risk that we're taking, and I can present that to the Secretary of State, who is my one-up, and we'll take it from there. As you start picking away at that and the integrity of that process, and you start having these questions that they're unable to answer, that's obviously when you start to hit problems. Of course, the easy thing would be to go, oh, never mind, it is what it is, done investigation, gone. But I've never, I'm not, I don't want to pious or anything about it, but, for me, it was about professionalism, right, as a minister, and professionalism to the cause that I was trying to address, which was the industrial nature of the vexatious claims against our servicemen and women. And that was very, very separate to covering up criminal activity.
So your discussions with the director didn't give you a warm and fuzzy feeling.
No.
Did your discussions with others about the investigation make you feel any warmer?
No.
So the concerns that you had about the ability of the MOD to investigate itself were not allayed by any discussions you had?
No.
Can we just turn to look to a document together, because I'd like your assistance with it, please. It's the black folder you've got available on your left-hand side, and it's behind divider number 3. And for those who are not following in the same bundle in which I'm looking at, the reference from the MOD exhibits is 198 000 4024. That's 198 000 4024. And you'll see, Mr. Mercer, that your particular bundle has your initials in red and a series of numbers sequentially at the bottom to try and help us find the different pages.
Yes.
Can I ask that we look initially to page 28 together? So that will be on 3 pages, I think, from the document which we've now got on the screen. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm entirely in your hands as to whether you read from the screen or from the paper that you've got before you, Mr. Mercer. But what we've got here is an email sent from your private office to Peter Ryan, who was the director, and it records a note of a meeting that he had had with you. That's the meeting the director had had with you. So I'll let you get your bearings for a moment. Do you see, if you look to the middle of the page, Peter is what is written.
Yep.
Thank you for coming to brief the Minister and for the extremely prompt follow-up actions in advance of getting the readout.
Yeah, who sent this? My private secretary.
Yes.
Yep.
Great. So back to 28, if you wouldn't mind. Peter, thank you for coming to brief the Minister and for the extremely prompt follow-up actions in advance of getting the readout. My apologies for the late readout. For your and our records, I have captured the discussion below. Please do correct me if I've missed anything or misrepresented the discussion. And you see that over the course of the next 2 pages, although it goes on to a third, but in effect covering 2 pages, there is your private secretary's note of the discussion that you had had with Peter Ryan when he'd come to brief you.
Yep.
Now, if we look on in the bundle, and forgive me for doing this, but if we just turn to page 31 for a moment. The email that your private secretary had sent to Peter Ryan resulted in a reply from Mr. Ryan, and he provided a version of the readout which he, Mr. Ryan, had edited.
Yeah.
And you'll see that because the track changes appear where additions have been made in red.
Yep.
And obviously you'll be familiar with that. And then if we look over the page onto pages 32 and 33, you can see where entries have also been deleted and they appear in the boxes to the right-hand side.
Right, yes.
So I'll allow you to get your bearings for a moment. But what we've got here is Peter Ryan's edited record of the briefing meeting that he had had with you shortly after you'd been appointed a minister.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look for a moment onto page 32, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, I'm on that page.
Thank you so much. In connection with Afghanistan, PR, Peter Ryan, briefed the Minister you on Op Northmore, and then we can see what's recorded there. A number of additions provided in red to the text that had originally been sent out by your private secretary, and a number of deletions that had been marked out on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
So as it now reads, there have been some 600 allegations and a much smaller number of civil suits. DPV, you asked Peter Ryan about the source of much of the litigation. Peter Ryan said Lee Day had played a significant role, although they were not the sole source of allegations. The great majority of the cases have been shut down in 2017, and the investigation into the more serious allegations had ended last month. I'm sorry, are you not with me, Mr. Mercer?
I am. I'm just trying to... There we go, right. So Lee Day played a significant role, and the in red has been added, and on the side has been deleted, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Right, okay, fine.
Yes.
I'm with you.
Excellent. The great majority of these cases have been shut down in 2017, and the investigation into the more serious allegations had ended last month, when it was concluded that the evidential sufficiency test for referral to the Service Prosecuting Authority would not be met. The Provost Marshal Army decision had been agreed by the Director of Service Prosecutions and by independent experts brought in to provide additional insurance in handling such complex and high-profile investigations. So that's how what was originally a relatively short sentence had been amended to read. And those were additions applied by Peter Ryan to the text that had been set out by your private secretary.
Yeah.
If we look to the next paragraph, you are recorded as having expressed some surprise that the Northmore investigations had ended. And do we see that there is a deletion which appears on the right-hand side? And what's been removed that your private secretary had noted is that you had provided his, that'll be your view, provided his view based on his own service and information provided to him privately. He was unconvinced that there had been no wrongdoing at all within Op Northmore.
Yeah.
So if that's an accurate record by your private secretary, it would appear that during the course of the meeting, he's taken a note of an observation you made to Mr. Ryan, and that observation was to the effect that you were unconvinced there had been no wrongdoing at all within Op Northmore.
Yeah, it was a she, just for clarity, so I don't get confused. But it was a she, the female. The private secretary had taken that note of that discussion that I'd had with Peter Ryan. That was her recollection, and that's what I said.
Does that accord with your recollection of what you said in that meeting? Or
Yeah, her note does. Yeah.
So, and what was it that led you to be unconvinced that there had been no wrongdoing at all within Operation Northmore?
Because there was the sort of specific nature of the allegations and the inability of commanders of those units and investigators and others to answer basic questions could not convince me. So this whole time, if I'm honest with you, I mean, no one wants to, as I've said before, no one wants to believe these allegations. And I wanted some sort of evidence to be able to go into bat for the unit and for the organisation and have some confidence that we had investigated this, and in the very messy and complicated nature of close combat, we could hand on heart say, look, I don't think there's anything here.
But at that
I was unconvinced I could do that.
So at that stage, you were not convinced that you could see there's nothing to these allegations.
Yep.
Right. Can we just turn over the page to look at another section that's deleted? If we look to the right-hand side to the deleted sections, do you see that 5 entries down, there's a block of text which reads as follows: deleted, was keen to understand how decisions had been arrived at in order to satisfy himself he could defend them in public. Does that refer to an expression that you had used, that you were keen to understand how decisions had been arrived at in order so that you could satisfy yourself that they could be defended in public?
Yes. I mean, that's what I wanted to do, right? I was a minister, I'm proud of the organisation, and I wanted to defend what we did in public, yeah.
And if I've understood what you've said just before, you were not convinced that the MOD could investigate itself properly or effectively?
No, I don't think it understood lawfare, no. And the nature of it and the pernicious nature of it, no. I mean, when, you've got to understand, when I came into all this, if you go into an organisation like the MOD and you say, look, veterans care is unacceptable, you're not going to be flavour of the month, right? Because they've been doing veterans care for a long time. If you come in and say, you don't understand lawfare, and to back this up, you're paying out £92 million, you're ruining all these people's lives, you don't understand lawfare, but they think they do, you're not going to be flavour of the month, right? So those were the points of tension. It was nothing personal, it was on those issues.
Just to clarify, you expressed a moment ago that one of the concerns you had was that you weren't convinced there was nothing to the Northmore allegations.
Yep.
So this isn't just about lawfare, vexatious industrial claims.
No, this is about criminal behaviour.
Right. So the two sides of the concern that you spoke of right at the outset of your evidence are engaged here. On the one hand, the MOD doesn't understand the pernicious effect of industrial scale litigation.
On the men and women who serve.
Exactly.
Correct.
But on the other hand, you believed at this stage that there might be substance to the allegations that Northmore was investigating.
Correct.
And you wanted to be in a position where you could give a public assurance that what needed to have been done had been done.
Yeah, look, my name is intimately wrapped up in this stuff, right? And it's been an incredibly lonely journey. In order to satisfy myself and kind of keep going, the one thing I have to retain is that integrity in what I'm doing. And it's obvious that if I was to do that, I had to satisfy myself that there was nothing here.
Can we just turn back in the bundle, although it takes us on in the exchange? If we go back to page 27 for a moment.
Yes.
Which is the Director of Judicial Engagement Policy, Mr. Peter Ryan's email to your team, which provided the amended document. Do you understand?
I do.
Right. So, I've taken the liberty, he writes, of treating this as a draft record. The issues covered are incredibly complex, so don't be surprised that I've made a lot of suggestions. Among the challenges that we share is a need to protect ministers and the department from the perils of disclosure. Were you concerned about the perils of disclosure?
I mean, disclosure is a very broad term. I don't know what he's talking about there. I think he's talking about the disclosure of UKSF sensitive stuff, and it's pretty obvious that that's being used as a blocker rather than an enabler, right? Because what we have here are serious criminal allegations. There shouldn't be any issues around disclosure. This happened, 10 years ago. So I don't know what he's talking about there. I mean, I must say, it's obvious that when I talked earlier in my evidence about being gamed by the department, this is in black and white, the evidence of that gaming.
Can we just go to the paragraph we were looking at? Can I just help you with that, if possible? In terms of the perils of disclosure, Mr. Ryan wrote on, given the ongoing and prospective legal challenges on a wide range of issues, it's quite possible that ministerial records would be put into the public domain. So rather than it being document that relates to UKSF, it appears he is expressing, you may or may not agree, a concern that ministerial documentation might enter the public domain, hence the perils of disclosure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a concern around that. That's his concern. I'm so sorry, I don't understand the point you're getting at.
What I want to identify is this.
Go on.
He appears to express a concern about ministerial documentation entering the public domain.
Yeah.
So he's treated what he was sent, namely the note of a meeting, as a draft.
Yeah.
And he has edited it in the way that we've just seen.
Yeah, well, that's what it says here, but you'll have to ask him.
Well, can we just look at this together, since it's a record of a meeting that you're supposed to have had with him, so presumably you looked at this.
Generally, you don't see readouts, no. You generally don't see readouts.
He writes, having expressed the concern that ministerial records will be put into the public domain, he wrote, so bland is often best. In other words, it would appear that anything that might be exciting or interesting needs to be removed from the document so that it's just bland and vanilla. I mean, is that how you read that? Am I being unfair to Mr. Ryan?
I think you're being slightly unfair to me. I think you should ask Mr. Ryan.
No,
Because you're asking me, you're asking me to translate the English language and take inferences from it. I'm not, he's written this, and out of respect to him, I think, we need to ask him what he meant. Clearly, you can infer what you're saying, but you can also infer other things.
Were you told that the readout had been edited in such a way to remove the passages that we've looked at?
No, of course not.
If you had been told that, would you have wanted those passages put back into the readout?
Look, if I have a meeting and my private secretary has no agenda but to record an accurate meeting of the record of the meeting, writes a readout, and then it goes to the relevant departments and they change that to make it look like they said things which, I mean, I said some pretty serious stuff there that's been taken out of the record. For example, I don't have any confidence in of Northmoor.
Yes.
Yeah, I would have been like, what's going on here? Yeah, of course. But this comes back to a point where I felt the entire time I was being gamed, rather than I wanted to be an asset to that department in dealing with lawfare. But it was never like that. It was like, we just got to manage Johnny.
which is why I took you to the document, Mr. Mercer. I'm not seeking you to interpret somebody else's language. But
Sure. I mean, it
I'm
does say
asking-
those words you've read out, yes.
So in dealing with Johnny, it would seem that bland is often best. I mean, it's hardly...
My wife would certainly agree.
Well, it's
Yes.
hardly a motto for the Director of Judicial Engagement Policy, is it?
Well, of course it's not, and it speaks to that point that I've mentioned a number of times. You know, but that sort of behaviour made it worse, because if you're the guy who's trying to be, you know, just tell me what happened here, right? And people are bland with you. You know, it doesn't take the brains of an archbishop to think, well, what are you not telling me?
Now, if we leave for a moment Mr. Ryan and consider others with whom you had conversations, because we'd
Yeah.
identified 3 people. If you want to, we can look back at it in your statement, but it's paragraph 20 for those that are following. The Director of Judicial Engagement Policy, we've just dealt with, Mr. Ryan.
Yeah.
You told us that you had conversations with the Chief of the Defence Staff
Yeah.
and the Secretary of State.
Yeah.
So insofar as the conversations you had with those 2 individuals, was that at the same time, or were they separate conversations?
Yeah, look, I would always go... I mean, I had a good relationship with the Chief of General Staff, to be fair to him. Chief of Defence Staff, I'm sorry. And I would... One thing I really missed in political and ministerial life was having the kind of... Not father figures, because that's too strong, but the kind of senior people around that when you encountered issues that you weren't quite 100% sure what to do about, you could go and knock on the door, shut the door and ask for some advice. And I very much had that relationship with that particular... CDS, and if I'm honest, I didn't know what to do, because you don't want to be, you don't want to be isolated. You don't want to be gamed. You don't want to be made to feel like you're on your own. You don't want to be made to feel like you're the fly in the ointment. But at the same time, it's very difficult when, when presented with the facts of this particular matter.
So did you discuss with CDS the allegations that you were made privy to?
Yes, I couldn't tell you what sort of level of detail, but yes.
But at least the 2 of you in that room understood what you were talking about.
On that rare occasion, I think so, yes.
And did you discuss with him your concerns that there might be more to the Otmore investigation than other people believe?
Everyone's always known those were my concerns. I say the same thing to everybody in public and private. They were unable to answer basic questions, and it made me very uneasy.
Did you express to him your concerns that the MOD was not best placed to investigate itself?
No, I wouldn't say the MOD is not best placed to investigate itself. All I'm concerned about is the integrity and professionalism of that investigation. I'm only interested in the truth, right? So whether the MOD does it, or you can clearly build in firewalls within organisations to have competent investigations. So it wasn't a question of the MOD is not good enough to do this. It's a question of, is this, there was always an overarching issue here where, I was bringing in this legislation, and then, you have, in 10, 15, 20 years' time, an individual confesses to criminal behaviour. And then that's a reflection on my professionalism as the minister and professional curiosity to understand, well, what actually is going on here? Have we investigated this to the nth degree where I can have confidence and stand up and say, look, I recognise the absolute mess that is close combat and all the rest of it, but I hand on heart, do not think there was something here, and we have to progress on those terms. And that's the position I've wanted to end up in, because I didn't want to be sat here today. I always knew I would be sat here today. I always knew that. And this was everything I tried to avoid at every stage.
In terms of the discussion or discussions that you had with CDS,
Yeah.
were you reassured by anything that he said to you that the investigation that was being carried out was going to be properly rigorous and thorough?
So I wasn't convinced he had the granularity on the investigation, because when you're talking about the investigation and the kind of why, you can't just look at an investigation and go, I don't like the smell of that. You have to have real granularity, intellectual application of methods of investigating to try and understand why there's a problem. I don't expect him to have that, but I expected him to be concerned about the allegations, and he was.
did he share your concern that there needed to be a detailed and thorough investigation to find out where the truth lay?
He made it clear to me that I needed to satisfy myself.
Like,
I think he sort of entrusted me to satisfy myself and then come back and tell him it's okay.
So, in a sense, he was expecting you to go out to do more work and to report back, just to let him know whether you did or didn't have concerns.
Sure. So this was around about the same time as Secretary of State, where he said to me, "I want you to get to the bottom of it." So I couldn't tell you if it was just before or just after, but it was around about the same time.
And I was just going to come to ask you about that. So can I ask you about what the discussion with the Secretary of State and what it was he asked you to do? So in addition to discussions with the Director of Judicial Engagement Policy and Chief of Defence Staff, you had a discussion with the Secretary of State about the same issues.
Correct.
And you and he each understood that when you spoke about allegations, it was allegations of people being engaged on target when they didn't pose a threat.
Yeah.
And it was allegations that in the aftermath of that, something might have happened to documentation.
The Secretary of State is fully aware of the allegations.
Right. Did you explain to him your concerns that there was something in the allegations?
I worked hard at every stage to disaggregate rumour and speculation and why. Like, why are you not comfortable with this? Why do you feel uncomfortable? Why do you not have that warm, fuzzy feeling that tells you, you know, there's nothing here? And I did attempt to walk him down that path, but if I'm completely honest, you know, he's Secretary of State, he's extremely busy, the department is engaged across multiple fronts. He essentially left it to me.
Okay. And in leaving it to you, was that a specific direction that he wanted you to resolve the situation one way or the other?
Yeah, I think he pretty much told me to get to the bottom of it, yeah.
And what did you understand that to mean?
We'll find out what's actually happened here. Did it happen? Have we investigated it properly? Are we going to look stupid in 3 or 4 years' time? If we bring in this legislation, everyone says we're covering up abuses. Are we actually doing that inadvertently?
So this is a specific request by the Secretary of State that you need to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah.
Okay. And what did you do to try and get to the bottom of it?
Well, I then engaged on a series of briefings with individuals involved at different iterative stages of the investigation.
And we'll probably come to talk about those a little later today because I see we're shortly before lunch. But can I ask you this? Did there reach a point where you were satisfied that you got to the bottom of it?
No, it's only ever got worse.
And when you
to
say
this day.
And when you say worse, what do you mean by it's only ever got worse?
I have been desperate for some sort of evidence to disprove these allegations because I don't want to believe them. I don't want to believe them of that unit. I have friends in that unit. I have friends who were killed on operations. I have friends who were never the same person again after Afghanistan. And I don't want to believe it. And so at every stage I've tried to find something to disprove these allegations, but I've been unable to.
And what about the quality of the investigation that was undertaken in respect of those allegations? Do you have faith in that?
I think, I don't think investigators acted in bad faith at all. I just think there's a very privileged level where you really understand how these operations work, and you have to have that knowledge to be able to pick out the anomalies. And unfortunately, they got a minister who had that knowledge, and the anomalies just couldn't stack up. Now, everybody else who sees the anomalies, including the Secretary of State, I can understand why they'd go, oh, well, there's no new evidence. No one's going to say anything. Let's get on with it. Unfortunately, I had a series of experiences and then ended up as a minister in the department. And that's why we are where we are today.
And can I clarify, I didn't mean by my question to imply that any of the investigators had behaved with bad faith.
Sure.
It was whether you had faith in the result of the investigation, not
no,
whether
because
they behaved with bad
the commanders of those units were unable to answer basic questions, to me, personally. And I made it clear in a letter I'm sure we'll come on to that I did not believe them. And I made that clear at every stage.
Did not believe who, Mr. Mercer?
The individuals who were giving me these accounts.
And were those individuals from UKSF?
Yes.
Were they from UKSF 1?
They were part of the joint organisation.
And when you didn't believe them, do you mean to suggest that you believe they were lying to you, or that they'd said something that was inaccurate, therefore you didn't believe it?
No, I've never said anybody lied to me. I've said that, and I'm very clear on this point, that you need to have a degree of intellectual curiosity and rigour with these issues. And you see that again, you see that time and again in government, in that, you know, you've seen it with the post office scandal, you've seen it with the stuff that's going on with the Afghan special forces. You have to have a degree of intellectual and ministerial competence and interest in this. So I don't think they were kind of misleading me. Sorry, I don't think they were deliberately sat there thinking, I'm going to tell this guy a falsehood. But there wasn't that professional curiosity to get to the bottom of it that I would have had if it was my organisation, because I wouldn't want allegations like that anywhere near me.
And were those individuals with whom you spoke that lacked this intellectual rigour, were they involved in some way in inquiring into what had happened?
Yeah. When I say intellectual rigour, I mean, obviously they're far more intellectual than me. I'm talking about the curiosity to be, well, why has that happened? Not just accepting a version of events that deep inside you know is implausible, but why has that happened? And we'll come on to this, I'm sure, this afternoon. But there's a series of events that anybody who has any experience of these operations would go, that's not plausible in any way. And I expected those senior commanders of those units to be able to sort that out. Not me, but them. And that was their responsibility.
And from your discussions with them, did you have any confidence that they were going to sort it out?
No. I thought they were going to have regular efforts to say, come forward with information. But as you'll discover in this inquiry, you have to do more than that. You have to understand what you're dealing with in terms of culture, organisation, operations, in order to really get to the truth.
How best do you think we can get to the truth in this inquiry?
Well, I think that's not for me, and I wouldn't. I think if I was, I think that the first thing is to have a real deep understanding of the sorts of operations that were going on, to then see the explanations and the reports that came back from that. And in my mind, they're pretty obvious questions, but I'm sure we'll come on to that this afternoon.
And presumably to speak to people with first-hand information.
You do need to speak to people with first-hand information, I'm sure you will.
That'd be a convenient moment, sir.
It would indeed. Mr. Mercer, your point is that you'd done the hard yards in Afghanistan, and unlike most of the others in this area, and you knew which questions to ask and which answers were or were not plausible, I think is your point.
Yes, I think that's a fair point. So yeah.
We'll break now.
So before you rise, we've asked Mr. Mercer to reflect on an issue over lunch. Myself and other members of the legal team would like to speak to him specifically
Indeed.
on that issue. Now I have your leave to do so.
Indeed, I was going to give you, of course, that liberty. Thank you for raising it. We'll break now, please, until 2 o'clock. If you need more time, then do let me know. And you may, Mr. Mercer, speak to your legal team about that particular aspect.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you all. 2 o'clock, please.